The air inside the grand ballroom was thick with power, wealth, and whispers. Crystal chandeliers glimmered overhead, and polished marble floors reflected the soft glow of golden lights. Waiters moved carefully between tables, balancing trays of champagne for the city's richest families. Everyone who mattered in business was there that night: investors, tycoons, heirs and heiresses of empires built on old money, and in the center of it all, seated at a long, polished oak table, was Elaine Carter, a black woman who had risen against all odds. She was the CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the world, a company so powerful that global banks and governments lined up for her innovations. To many, she was a symbol of brilliance, resilience, and change. But to some in that room, she was an outsider. Elaine had been invited by the Montgomery family, one of the wealthiest dynasties in America, known for their billion-dollar real estate empire. On paper, the evening was meant to be a celebration. Chance to finalize a $500 million deal that would benefit both sides. But beneath the polished smiles and polite handshakes, something else simmered in the air. Not everyone wanted her at that table. From the very start, she could feel the eyes on her. The whispers weren't hidden well. She caught the quick glances, the smirks, the way some of the younger heirs laughed quietly whenever she spoke. It was the same old story she had lived through countless times: rooms filled with people who didn't believe she belonged. But tonight felt heavier. Tonight felt personal. She adjusted her sleek black dress jacket, lifted her chin, and reminded herself of the truth. She wasn't just invited to the table, she had earned her place at the head of it. Still, the unease grew stronger as Gregory Montgomery, the silver-haired patriarch of the family, leaned in with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "So, Elaine," he said smoothly, loud enough for the entire table to hear, "tell me again, how does someone like you manage to run such a company? Must be exhausting trying to keep up in a world like this." The table went silent. Some chuckled under their breath, others hid their amusement behind wine glasses. It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said, "Someone like you," sharp enough to cut through the velvet air of the ballroom. Elaine's hand tightened around her glass, but she didn't flinch. She had heard worse. She had been underestimated, mocked, and dismissed more times than she could count. But the sting still found its way inside her chest, and the silence around her only made it louder. A younger Montgomery Chad, the arrogant grandson known for his wild spending and smug charm, added fuel to the fire. "Grandfather's right," he said with a grin. "It's almost unbelievable. I mean, don't you ever feel out of place, sitting here with us?" The laughter that followed was sharp, designed not just to humiliate her, but to remind everyone who held the power in the room. For a moment, the music, the chatter, the clinking of glasses seemed to fade, leaving only that sound, the sound of being laughed at in front of the very people she was about to sign a deal with. But Elaine didn't answer. "Not yet," she breathed. Slowly, her mind racing, she knew every investor at the table. She knew every figure in the contract. And she knew something no one else did. What they thought was a night to belittle her was about to turn into the most expensive mistake of their lives, because the deal wasn't sealed yet, and with one decision, with one signature withheld, she had the power to cost the Montgomerys $500 million. Far away, on a crowded airplane earlier that same day, another story had quietly begun, one that would soon intertwine with hers. A young black teenager named Marcus had been on his way back from school break, nervous, but proud. He wasn't rich, he didn't have a famous last name, but he carried something else inside him: kindness. When a heavily pregnant woman boarded the plane, struggling to find a seat, Marcus noticed the discomfort on her face. Without thinking twice, he stood up, gave her his seat, and quietly moved to the back. No one clapped, no one announced it. But the woman's eyes filled with tears as she sat down, whispering a thank you that seemed heavier than just gratitude. Minutes later, she slipped a folded note into his hand. Marcus didn't open it right away. He tucked it into his pocket, not knowing that inside those few written words lay something that would change his life forever. Back in the glittering ballroom, Elaine's eyes scanned the faces around her table, the smirks, the arrogance. The certainty that they could humiliate her without consequence. They thought she would swallow her pride for money. They thought power meant they could buy her silence. But what they didn't know was that Elaine Carter had built her empire on walking away from those who disrespected her. And tonight, the Montgomery family was about to learn that lesson in the most brutal way. The champagne still sparkled. The laughter still echoed. But under the table, Elaine's hand moved toward the contract folder. She tapped it lightly, the faint sound lost in the music but heavy in her mind. $500 million sat between them. One stroke of her pen could lock it in. One word from her could destroy it all. And as the billionaire family leaned closer, waiting for her to prove she was desperate enough to endure their humiliation, Elaine's lips curved into the faintest smile. They had no idea what was coming. Elaine kept her expression calm as Gregory Montgomery raised his glass in a mock toast, pretending nothing cruel had been said. The other guests followed his lead, clinking glasses, sipping wine, their laughter rising again as though humiliating. Someone in public was just part of the evening's entertainment. For Elaine, it was a scene she had lived through before. Different rooms, different faces, the same poison. She had learned long ago how the powerful tested outsiders, how they measured if you were desperate enough to tolerate their disrespect just to stay in their circle. But they had miscalculated. Elaine's mind drifted for a moment, back to her early years, long before she had ever worn designer suits or sat at tables worth billions. She had grown up in a modest neighborhood where her mother worked 2 jobs, and still came home tired but smiling, teaching her that worth was never measured by wealth. She remembered studying under a flickering street lamp when the power was cut, reading until her eyes ached because she believed knowledge would carry her further than money. Every scar, every long night had built her into the woman now sitting across from the Montgomery family. The contrast could not be sharper. Around her, the heirs and heiresses wore jewels that glittered with the price of houses. They had never stood in a food line, never gone without. To them, deals weren't survival, they were trophies. And that was exactly why they underestimated her. They saw only the color of her skin, only that she was a woman who did not come from their world. What they didn't see was the steel underneath. Her silence, the years of discipline and sacrifice that had given her the power to bring them down with a single choice. Gregory leaned closer, his voice low but sharp enough for those near him to hear. You should be grateful for this opportunity. Our family doesn't extend such generosity to just anyone. His tone dripped with the weight of old money, as if he believed his name alone was worth more than everything. Elaine had built. Her fingers brushed the contract folder again. Grateful? The Montgomerys thought she needed them. They didn't realize. She had walked into the ballroom already prepared to walk out. The deal would benefit them far more than it would her. Without her technology, their expansion plans would crumble before they began. But Elaine remained silent, letting the tension grow, letting their arrogance reveal itself. At the far end of the ballroom, a group of reporters waited quietly, cameras lowered for now. The press wasn't officially invited to the table, but they always lingered near power. Elaine could sense their eyes. If she decided to cancel the deal here and now, it wouldn't just be numbers on a paper, it would be headlines by morning. The Montgomery family could laugh tonight, but tomorrow the world would be laughing at them. And yet, Elaine did not move too quickly. Timing mattered. In business, in life, and especially in moments like this. She sipped her water, calm, watching as Chad Montgomery continued to mock her, his voice loud enough to draw glances from other tables. You know, it's amazing, he said, smirking. You've got the seat, the dress, the company name on the invitation. But somehow, he leaned back, spreading his arms wide. You'll never quite fit in here. A few chuckles rippled around the table, the kind meant to wound more deeply because they pretended to be casual. Elaine said nothing, her gaze steady, her silence louder than any words. What they thought was weakness was actually calculation. Every insult only confirmed what she already knew. They didn't see her as an equal. And if they didn't, then why should she give them her respect or her business? Far away from the glittering ballroom, Marcus sat quietly on the plane, his backpack tucked under his seat. The pregnant woman he had helped earlier was resting now, her head leaning against the window, eyes closed with relief. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his smaller replacement seat, but he didn't regret giving his up. He thought about his mother, who always told him, "Kindness is free, but it carries value no one can measure." His hand brushed against the folded note still in his pocket. For a second he considered opening it, but something made him wait. Maybe it was the way the woman had pressed it into his palm, her hand trembling as if the note meant more than she could say. Marcus looked out of the window instead, watching the clouds drift by, unaware that the words inside that note were about to connect him to a world he never imagined. Back in the ballroom, Elaine finally leaned forward, her voice steady, almost gentle, but carrying across the table with clarity. "You're right," she said simply, her eyes on Chad. The sudden agreement caught him off guard, and for a moment his grin faltered. "I will never fit in here. I wasn't made to." Her words were measured, each syllable deliberate. The table fell silent, waiting for her to say more, to either bow or break. But she stopped there, letting the weight of her statement hang in the air like a warning. Gregory cleared his throat, covering the awkward silence with forced laughter. "Well, of course," he said, waving it off. "We're only having a bit of fun. Business is business. We mustn't get too sensitive." Elaine's eyes flickered toward him, but she said nothing. She knew the type. Men who hid cruelty behind humor, who dismissed dignity as sensitivity, who expected you to smile through their disrespect. She had no intention of smiling tonight. The orchestra in the corner began playing softly, the music swelling as waiters delivered another course. The rest of the guests tried to return to their chatter, but the tension at the Montgomery table was unmissable. Elaine's silence wasn't submission, it was defiance. And though no one realized it yet, every passing second was bringing them closer to the moment she would decide their fate. Meanwhile, Marcus finally unfolded the note in his lap. His hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from curiosity. The handwriting was neat but hurried, written with urgency. He read the first line, his eyes widening as he realized this wasn't just a thank you. The words hinted at something bigger, something personal, something that might tie his small act of kindness to a future he couldn't yet imagine. He read it again, the meaning sinking in, his heart racing faster with each word. But before he could process it fully, the flight attendant's voice broke over the intercom, announcing turbulence ahead. Marcus folded the note quickly, tucking it away. He leaned back in his seat, but his mind was no longer calm. Questions raced through him. Who exactly was that woman? And why did her note sound less like gratitude and more like a secret being passed into his hands? In the ballroom, Elaine glanced once more at the contract folder. Her silence had grown heavy enough that even those who mocked her before now watched nervously. They needed her signature. Without it, the entire $500 million deal dissolved into smoke. She saw their confidence flicker, their arrogance cracking ever so slightly. It was the first crack in the armor, but it wouldn't be the last, and as she rested her hand on the folder, meeting Gregory Montgomery's eyes with a calm, unblinking stare, the entire family shifted uneasily. They didn't know yet, but the night had already turned against them. Elaine Carter was about to show them what real power looked like. Elaine's fingers lingered on the folder as the orchestra's notes drifted softly across the ballroom. The polished table reflected the glow of the chandeliers, but behind all that elegance sat a storm waiting to break. Gregory Montgomery forced? Another laugh, but Elaine noticed the stiffness in his jaw. He knew she was stalling. He knew she had power. That was why his words had grown sharper, why his grandson's mocking had turned bolder. When arrogance feels threatened, it doubles down. Elaine took another sip of water and looked at the faces surrounding her. Investors, partners, board members, they were all watching, all waiting. Some avoided her gaze, ashamed of what had been said but too afraid to speak. Others leaned forward, eager to see if she would fold. She wondered if any of them truly understood what was at stake. For her, it wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, about refusing to let anyone place her beneath them. Her thoughts traveled again to her past. She remembered sitting in boardrooms years ago, the only black woman at the table, listening as men questioned her ability, her intelligence, her very right to speak. She remembered the sting of polite dismissals, the endless maybe next times, until she stopped asking for seats and started building her own. Every insult tonight echoed those earlier wounds, but it also reminded her how far she had come. She was no longer the one begging for opportunity. She was the opportunity. Chad leaned in, his voice low but pointed. You know, if you're unsure about signing, we could always find someone else. There are plenty of people lined up to work with us. You wouldn't want to miss your chance, would you? His smirk widened as if he had landed a clever blow, but Elaine only glanced at him, calm and unshaken. She could see it clearly. His bravado wasn't confidence. It was fear disguised as arrogance. He was bluffing. They had no one else. In another corner of the ballroom, one of the reporters shifted in his seat, sensing a story. He had been covering corporate deals for years, but something about this evening felt different. The way Elaine sat in silence. The way the Montgomerys kept pushing harder. It was a battle of wills, not just numbers. He jotted notes quickly, unaware that what he witnessed would soon explode into headlines far beyond the business section. Meanwhile, Marcus sat quietly in his cramped airplane seat, staring at the folded note now burning in his pocket. He couldn't stop thinking about the woman's eyes when she handed it to him, eyes filled with something deeper than gratitude, almost as if she was entrusting him with a burden. His curiosity grew, but so did his hesitation. What if it was something he wasn't ready to know? His mother's voice echoed in his head again. The smallest choices can open the biggest doors. He wondered if giving up his seat had already opened one for him. The turbulence shook the plane, and Marcus gripped the armrest. He thought about his life back home, the crowded apartment, the way he dreamed of doing something bigger, but never knew how. Maybe the note was nothing more than a thank you, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was the beginning of a story he couldn't yet see. He closed his eyes, promising himself he would read it again when the flight landed. Back in the ballroom, the dinner plates had been cleared and the final course arrived. But Elaine barely noticed. Her focus stayed on the contract and the family across from her. Gregory Montgomery's patience was wearing thin. His voice hardened as he leaned in. Let's not waste any more time, Miss Carter. This deal is worth $500 million. If you walk away, you'll regret it. Opportunities like this don't come twice. Elaine met his gaze, unblinking. His attempt to intimidate her only strengthened her resolve. She had heard threats like this before, always from people who believed money gave them control. But true power wasn't in the numbers, it was in the choice. She controlled whether the ink touched the paper or not. And they knew it. That was why their jokes had turned into pressure, why their laughter had soured into warning. They were desperate, though they hid it under arrogance. The tension at the table grew unbearable. Guests at nearby tables began glancing over, sensing the energy shift. The music couldn't mask the silence anymore. Even the waiters slowed, careful not to interrupt what was happening. Elaine's heart beat steadily, not with fear but with a clarity she had felt many times before. The moment before a decision. The moment before history shifts, but she wasn't ready to show her hand yet. She wanted them to sweat, to understand what it meant to underestimate her. She pushed the folder away slightly, as if she had lost interest. Gregory's eyes flickered. Chad shifted uncomfortably, his confidence cracking. Elaine leaned back in her chair, her voice quiet but sharp enough to cut the air. You speak of opportunities. But the question is, whose opportunity is this? Really? No one answered, no one could. Because they knew the truth. Without her signature, without her company's technology, their empire's expansion would stall before it even began. They needed her far more than she needed them. In that silence, Elaine thought of Marcus without knowing his name, without knowing his story. 2 different lives, 2 different places, but both standing at crossroads they couldn't yet see. Marcus had chosen kindness without expecting anything in return. Elaine was about to choose dignity, even at a cost. And somehow, both choices would soon collide in ways neither of them imagined. The ballroom buzzed with forced laughter again, but it was thinner now, weaker. The cracks were showing. Gregory tapped his fingers against the table, the polished surface amplifying his irritation. Chad tried to start another joke but faltered halfway, realizing no one was laughing with him anymore. The family's control over the room was slipping, and everyone felt it. Elaine knew the moment was close. The moment when she would either sign or stand. The tension coiled tighter with every passing second, each breath heavier than the last. And though no one else could see it, she smiled inside. Because this was what true suspense felt like, the silence before the storm, the pause before the world turned upside down. The contract lay untouched, the signatures empty. $500 million hung in the balance. And in the air around them, the unspoken truth grew louder. The Montgomery family had underestimated the wrong woman. Elaine sat there, her hand resting lightly on the contract folder. The Montgomery family leaned forward, expecting her to give in, expecting her to sign with a polite smile after all the insults they had thrown at her. Gregory's eyes gleamed with false confidence. Chad's smirk was back, certain they had cornered her, but then Elaine pushed the folder aside. Not with anger, not with a dramatic gesture, but calmly, with the same composure she had carried her entire life. The silence that followed was louder than any outburst. Forks froze mid-air. Glasses hung suspended. Even the orchestra seemed to falter as if sensing the moment. "I've decided," Elaine said softly, her voice cutting through the still air. "This deal is not for me." The words landed like thunder. Gregory blinked, unable to process what he'd just heard. "Not for you," he repeated, his voice shaking with disbelief. "Do you realize what you're walking away from?" Elaine leaned forward, her gaze steady, her tone unflinching. "Do you realize what you've already lost?" "You thought?" "My silence meant weakness, but I was measuring you." "And you failed? Respect matters more than money? Dignity matters more than contracts." "If you can't see that, then $500 million won't save you," gasps echoed around the table. Some of the investors shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of how ugly the Montgomerys had looked in their arrogance. Reporters' pens flew. Across notepads, cameras flicking on discreetly. The humiliation the family had intended for Elaine had turned swiftly into their own downfall. Gregory's face flushed red, his fists tightening against the table. "You can't just walk away," he barked. Elaine rose from her chair with elegance, smoothing her jacket. "I just did." With that, she turned and walked across the ballroom, her heels clicking against the marble like a steady drumbeat of defiance. Every head turned to watch. No one laughed now. No one mocked. They only watched as the woman they had tried to humiliate left them drowning in the ruins of their own arrogance. That night, the headlines exploded. "Black woman CEO walks out on Montgomery Empire, cancels $500 million deal." News anchors debated the fallout. Investors scrambled. The Montgomery name, once untouchable, was dragged into the mud. Elaine Carter, the woman they had tried to belittle, had become the face of strength and dignity across the country. Meanwhile, on the plane, Marcus finally unfolded the note again after landing. His hands shook slightly as he read it under the dim airport lights. The words were simple, but life-changing. "You gave me your seat when I needed it most. I am the director of a scholarship foundation. Consider this your first step toward a future you deserve. Call the number below." Tears filled his eyes. That one act of kindness, that one moment when he chose to put someone else before himself, had opened a door bigger than anything he imagined. A chance for college, a chance for something greater than the small life he thought he was trapped in. 2 lives, 2 choices. Elaine refusing to bow to arrogance, Marcus choosing kindness when no one was watching. Different paths, but the same truth. Real power doesn't come from money or status or old names. It comes from courage, from doing what is right when it's hardest. And while the Montgomery family clung desperately to the wreckage of their pride, Elaine walked forward with her head held high. Marcus stepped into a future he never thought possible. Both carried proof that the smallest decisions, the choice to stand tall, the choice to be kind, can shape the biggest destinies. The world often measures success in wealth and deals, but the true measure is found in character. Moral of the story: never trade your dignity for approval, and never underestimate the power of kindness. Money can be lost, but respect and compassion leave a legacy that no one can take away.